Our first question will be from a live caller. So we'll provide a little background first. Our first caller is Tammy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So you remember recently you had an interaction with a lady, we'll call her Julie, and the two of you got in a car together and you turned on the radio. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And Julie asked you to turn it off. This could be a real source of conflict between people. Radio on, radio off. We could come up with a list of reasons to justify either one of you. And most of the reasons don't amount to spit. So you did turn the radio off, but how did you feel about it?
Controlled.
Controlled. And she might have been. She might have been controlling you. Turns out that doesn't really matter. Doesn't matter if she asked you nicely. Doesn't matter if she was controlling you. What matters is how you felt. So when you say, I felt controlled, it's not intentional, but actually controlled is not a feeling word. Controlled.
I felt angry.
Yeah, you felt angry. And the reason you felt angry was because of the thinking behind it, which was that she was controlling you, and you didn't like that.
Right.
So, being controlled, leads to anger only under what circumstances?
I don't feel loved.
Yeah. If you don't feel loved, then somebody controlling you, at least in your perception, takes away whatever little shred of love you've got, and so you were irritated, although you did comply and turn the radio off. So our actions often don't mean nearly as much as the motivation behind them. So you turned the radio off, went to wherever you were going, and then later in the same day, got in the car, same woman is in the car, Julie, and you turned the radio on. Do you remember what you said about what your rationalizations were for turning the radio on?
You know, the funny thing is the car turned the radio on automatically every time it started.
Okay.
I actually didn't turn it on. I just was not thinking about it, and I didn't turn it down right away. I just kept it turned down, but I didn't, I wasn't thinking about her, and so I didn't automatically turn it down right away.
There we go. So your first impulse was to correct me. So I said, you turned the radio on, and you said, well, no, really, the car turned the radio on.
Yeah.
Doesn't really make a difference. Do you see why?
The feeling behind it.
The feeling behind it. So when I said you turned the radio on, effectively, by not turning the radio down, you just as well have turned the radio on. And sure, the car turned it on, but, well, who cares? Would it be fair to say that you weren't really caring all that much about what mattered to her?
Yes, I was not making an effort to care about her.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you were poking at her or provoking her or trying to irritate her. Nope, doesn't mean any of those things. But it's a really common excuse that we use. We all use it. I didn't mean to annoy her. Yeah, I believe that, but you didn't intend not to either. And it would also probably be true to say that you forgot that it bothered her.
Yeah.
Right. I get all those. And they're still excuses, because if we really care about somebody, we'd remember.
Yeah.
So, very nice. I mean, this is a nice example of Tammy telling the truth live. This is great, because there's so many excuses to offer, a handful of which she has provided us live, but they really don't matter. The truth is, you just didn't care all that much about her happiness, and I'm not saying you should have. So then you sent me an email and you said, well, Julie felt hurt by some of my actions this past weekend, and it may have been just the car radio, it may have been other things, don't care. You said, is it appropriate to apologize? Would that be defending? So, give it a shot. Try answering your own question.
No.
No.
I don't think it would be defending.
You don't think it would be defending. So,
if I was being totally loving,
yeah,
I would apologize because whatever I did hurt her, and because I wanted her to feel loved, not to make myself feel better. It would, if I did it for her, I don't think it would be defending.
Of course, that presumes the if you were doing it for her. And you didn't really hurt her. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All you did was be, mildly inconsiderate. So to say, well, I'd be calling because I cared about her, maybe, but you didn't hurt her in the first place. So why would you have to tell her something so she wouldn't be hurt? Are you following me?
Yes.
So my recommendation would probably be, don't apologize. And here's why. Because just in our conversation, that's without her here, to some extent, you've already defended yourself. Make sense?
Yes.
If you were to apologize to her, it would be virtually unavoidable that you would defend yourself, in which case you'd make it worse. The primary person for you to say anything to her for would be for yourself.
Right.
Because you weren't responsible for her happiness in the first place. So notice right off in your email you didn't say, I was selfish. You said, she felt hurt by my actions. Boy, that just reveals the whole deal right there. How many times have people apologized to you and said things like, I'm sorry you were offended? How many times have you heard that?
A few.
Many. I've heard it many times.
Yeah.
What they're saying is, I'm sorry you were such a touchy, sensitive little princess that you had your little feelings hurt. But they don't actually apologize for what they did.
Right.
So if you really got what we've been talking about, you would have just said, I was selfish. And then in addition, you might say, Julie felt hurt, but you would not say you hurt her feelings, because you didn't.
Right.
Making sense?
Yeah.
So your tendency would be, if you apologized, it would be to try to eliminate any disapproval she had toward you. You wouldn't mean to do it, but you would. How do I know? Just from the tenor of this conversation. So I would just wait. I would just call it a lesson learned. Perhaps on some future occasion with somebody in a similar circumstance, then you might try saying, hey, you, whoever it was, you might say, I wasn't thoughtful. I should have paid attention, or could have at least paid attention to your feelings, but I didn't. Period. End. Clean.
Yeah.
But I'd let this one go. So you did a really nice job of truth-telling with, frankly, not a lot of assistance. Nice work. Any questions about that?
No, I don't think so, because it always comes back to love, and any question I have is going to be, still trying to defend. So, nope.
Maybe. In this particular case, then, it's actually more important that you learn from the interaction than that you apologize for it. Now, is that clearer?
Yes. Yeah.
There we go. So,
I do feel clear now.
yeah, no problem. You did good.
Thank you.
Actually, way more effective than an apology. So, good on you, as the Australians would say. Nice work, honey.
Thanks, Debbie.
See ya. Nice example. You would think this is a great example of how a given action can either be productive or non-productive. So simply turning off the radio because somebody asks could either be loving, an example of caring about them. It could be an example of simply being weak and being easy to manipulate. It could be an example of complying but being irritated, which would not be loving. So you can do exactly the same physical act and yet have widely varying motivations. And what matters is the motivation. It's not really the act itself that is good or bad. Next member says, a coworker is sexually harassing me and I'm ready to call him on his stuff. I'm afraid, though, but I know I need to move past the fear. Can you give me a short script to tell him to stop? So before we talk about a script, which is just answering a question, solving a problem, the most important thing is to know that you have nothing to be afraid of. Until you feel worthwhile, you will defend yourself and you'll attack him. Now, when I say, let's see, yeah, you did say it was a him. So again, it's not the action like we just talked about with Tammy. It's your motivation, how you feel when you do it. So talk to however many people it takes for you to feel worthwhile and unafraid and capable of talking to this person who's sexually harassing you without defending yourself, without making demands, without standing up for yourself, which is really just a kind way of saying attacking him back, where you don't feel threatened. So just because somebody is sexually harassing you, which is victimizing you, doesn't mean you have to feel like a victim. So as long as you feel victimized, I'd keep practicing with real love people till you don't, or you're just going to screw it up. So he's attacking you, and the solution is not to attack him back. This is how wars start. So that's the first step. You got to get the not feeling victimized thing down. I mean, really down, where you don't feel afraid at all. Practice these words that I'll give you some sample words, but practice saying them with somebody who cares about you. First, make an appointment with him. Why? It's always about love. None of this is a technique. You make an appointment with him because you don't want to blindside him in the same way he's blindsided you. So if you just stop him in the hall and hit him with, "You're sexually harassing me," he's going to feel attacked. Even if you don't feel attacking, he'll feel attacked by the suddenness of your bringing the subject up. If he asks you what it's about, just tell him that you need his help to iron out some work stuff with him, which is true, so that he doesn't feel threatened. Always about love. First, you feel loved, then you set an appointment so he can feel safe, then you tell him you're just going to work out some work stuff again so that he feels safe, because if anybody doesn't feel safe, you're going to have a war. Then have a friend from work, somebody you trust, present for the meeting. Why? This is actually pretty important. One, you need somebody there to help you feel loved. This has got to be somebody you trust. And second, should it turn ugly, because it could, even if you do it very well, it's really useful in even potential confrontations to have a witness, so that later he can't say that you attacked him or whatever. Then you tell him something like this, and these words aren't meant to be delivered exactly, but I'm giving them to you really only for one reason, so that you have the confidence that there's at least some words you have, so that you can lean back on them if you can't come up with words of your own. It's for your confidence. So you say, "Fred, you have been X and Y, and you go through his behaviors as specifically as possible. So you say, on Thursday, as you were talking to me, you referred to a body part or whatever he did that's sexually harassing you. You be very specific about what he said, as specific as you can. If you just say sexual harassment, oh, he's going to deny it and you're going to be nowhere. Then you tell him, this is unacceptable to me. I feel sexually harassed, and it has to stop right now. If you feel sexually harassed, that's enough. It doesn't matter whether he meant to or not. So notice, you're not even asking him if he meant to. It has to stop. It has to stop completely, not just an improvement. I'd like to resolve this right now. But if the behavior continues in the slightest, then I will take it to the next level in the company. Do you have any questions? See how clear this is? You tell him exactly how it has affected you, exactly how he could resolve it right now, and exactly what will happen if it doesn't resolve right now. Now, it's a virtual certainty that he'll argue, and he'll attempt to tell you that he didn't mean anything by what he said. Oh, honey, did you know you really have a nice figure? Oh, please, anybody who's stupid enough to say that they didn't mean anything should have their head cut off their shoulders anyway. But he may try something like that. Almost everybody defends what they do. Stop him immediately. As soon as he says, well, I didn't mean to, you go, no. I'm not here to listen to the reasons because they don't matter. I'm telling you how I'm affected by the words you used and that this behavior cannot continue. It really doesn't matter whether you meant to do them. They just have to stop. See how clear we are? We are not having an argument. We are not having a discussion about whether it was sexual harassment. You get to define whether it was or whether it was not. And if he decides to argue about it, you say, not a problem. If you want to argue, then we'll go before Human Resources and we'll argue there. Very few men will want to continue this discussion in front of the person who gives seminars on sexual harassment. So clear, not afraid, but also non-threatening. No anger. Next person, a coach, Lisa, wrote me about a real love client, Cindy. This woman has been angry, victim-y, blaming, and alone for more than 50 years. Cindy, long time. And she asked Lisa for help. And then everything Lisa suggested that she do, then Cindy resisted. She argued, she withdrew, she became angry. In fact, the coaching became absolutely impossible. So Lisa suggested that Cindy might come and see me because she, Lisa, just couldn't help her anymore. She admitted that she got to her limit and went, hey, as a surgeon, I did that on a number of occasions. I did the very best I could. If that didn't work, I would send somebody to a subspecialist. So Cindy wrote to Lisa, and Lisa asked me how I would respond. So Cindy said this, and I'm going to respond mostly in the way that I would directly respond to Cindy if I were Lisa, which clearly I'm not, unless I'm just a really cute version of Lisa. She said, I've been thinking about our conversation in which you said you would no longer be working with me. Despite my being half of the partnership, you gave up and wanted to hand me off without discussing it with me first. I don't understand why you didn't bring up what you were thinking and feeling about our working together or not working. It could have opened up a conversation and perhaps led to a breakthrough. I had fully intended to fully cooperate finally with what you were suggesting, but that opportunity has now and forever vanished. Now, to those on the chat, before I respond to Cindy, this is classic victim stuff. Cindy was completely uncooperative, but now that Lisa has correctly told her that her victimhood has made growth impossible, suddenly she's claiming that she would have cooperated. She doesn't realize that she's also admitted that if she would have, she hadn't been. And that in the end of their relationship is all Lisa's fault. So blame, blame, blame. And, oh, if only you'd done this, I would have done that. Victims never admit fault. So what would I say to Cindy? It's easy now for you to talk about cooperating, but we've been working together for months, and the entire time you've done nothing but fight me. In fact, sweetie, you've been fighting everybody for 50 plus years, which is how you got to this place of being absolutely alone and bitter and angry and needing a coach. You simply did not trust me. We did engage in a coaching-client relationship, and you refused to be coached. I'm okay with that. I just accepted your refusal. I suggested that perhaps Greg could help you, but you refused that too. I didn't hand you off. I can't hand you anywhere. I only recommended what you do. I just recognized that I couldn't help you. So I gave you an alternative instead of just saying, go away, which actually is a kindness. Your lack of intent to really change is obvious because you're still fighting. I'm sad about that, but I'm simply accepting it. I'm not abandoning you. I'm accepting your decision not to cooperate. So Cindy continued. There are two primary issues I'm having, and victims go through long lists of how you're wrong. Apologize, that was a little parenthesis. Number one, I feel abandoned and unloved by my coach, you, who claimed that she wasn't going anywhere and who didn't even discuss the decision with me to come to an accord. And number two, I feel taken advantage of, emotionally and financially. Both of these feel very sad and do not build trust. Before I respond to Cindy, do you get the victim language in this? Abandoned, unloved, taken advantage of. She didn't use the word betrayed, I think only because she forgot to. Didn't even discuss the decision with me. Well, of course she didn't. When somebody has refused to cooperate, you don't say, it's ridiculous to say to somebody, so if you continue not to cooperate, well then I'll have to admit that I couldn't help. There's no reason to warn somebody. They've simply made it clear that they're not going to cooperate. So you simply say, I have nothing else to offer. It's ridiculous to say to somebody who cannot cooperate, if you do this, I'll leave. No, you just leave because they've already made it clear that they won't cooperate. So I would say to Cindy, you'd already decided not to trust. I attempted to build trust from the first minute we spent together. You didn't trust me. You called Greg and you didn't trust him either. Worse, the overwhelming piece of evidence that this isn't about me or Greg is that you've never fully trusted anybody, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. And now you blame me, which really makes no sense. Cindy continues, this abrupt withdrawal, you hear the victim language, and no assurance of a refund, combined with the awareness of the many who, even after having spent significant time and money coaching, aren't much better off, and I no longer feel safe. Victims are excellent attackers. In fact, there really aren't any victims who don't also attack. And they attack with abandon because they've been hurt. So once they've been hurt, they feel justified in saying pretty much anything to anybody, no matter how rude or inconsiderate or absolutely unbased in the truth it is. I would say to Cindy, there are many people who are not better off after their brief, superficial, and untrusting brush with real love. They expected real love to change them without any trust or effort on their part, which is impossible. And two, you said you don't feel safe. Well, of course you don't feel safe. Your entire life has been a series of hurtful, disappointing experiences, which were not your fault. But then you made a judgment that you could trust nobody So you feel safe with nobody because you've already decided that you never will be. So it really doesn't matter what anybody does. You've already decided not to trust them. Cindy continues, I'm sure you and Greg have helped many people, but real love has also alienated and hurt people. I can tell you this categorically. This would be me speaking to Cindy. Real love has alienated and hurt nobody ever. That's like saying somebody has been gutted with felt. Unconditional love can't hurt people. It's impossible. The people who claim they were hurt by real love were simply very, very damaged long before they encountered real love. But then when they chose not to trust and their lives remained the same, and how else could it be without trust? They can't take responsibility for their own choices. So then they claim that real love hurt them, as they claimed before that it was their boyfriend and the boyfriend before that and their boss and their coworker and the mailman, and the list is endless. Whoever's in front of a victim right now is the cause of all the pain in their 50, 60 years. It seems to make sense in the moment, but it's just not true. Cindy continues, so what's the answer? I don't know. What I do know is that I'm shocked and hurt, favorite words for a victim, and I don't know that real love is real or that it's the best way for me to grow. Well, after 5+ decades, honey, you've never found a way to grow. So real love is just another in a long line of principles and people that you've chosen not to trust. Nothing else has worked for you. Nothing. You said so when we started our coaching. You're alone, you're miserable, and have just in recent weeks expressed suicidal thoughts that were there before we even started coaching. So you can't claim real love has hurt you. You've been suicidal for years. You've just reiterated them in the last few weeks. You were already hurt, and now you're just eager to blame anybody or anything but yourself. Again, completely understandable. It's all because of your pain. I understand your blaming, but it's not helping you. In fact, it's killing you. It's really hard to tell victims the truth. And victims are so convincing that it's your fault and everybody else's fault. And they get so angry when you don't agree with them that everybody just backs off and they disappear. And so victims are left with the conviction that, well, they've been abandoned again. And yes, once again, everybody's proved that it's their fault, that they're mean and cruel and uncaring. Being a victim takes a lot of work, baby. And it's a lot of work that's expended for absolutely no salutary result. This week's Sylvieism. Sylvie, who is now 4, said she showed her mother, Jeanette, a little picture and said, I drew a picture of hearts for Bonnie. Holds up this little picture, who's 5 months old. She can do whatever she wants with it. She can crunkle it, which means crinkle it, ball it up, slobber on it, eat it, whatever. She's already got at age 4 what most of us don't understand as adults, what a true gift is. You give somebody a gift and they can do whatever they want to. You don't need thanks or appreciation or to have it treated special or framed or put in the newspaper or anything. And she's got it at 4. I'm just barely learning it at 64. Love to watch little kids who are raised the right way from the beginning. Let me tell you about Sally. Her father's in the hospital, dying. Her son, Robert, called her to ask if she would take him to visit his grandpa, her father. It's like 3-hour drive away from Sally. Now, who could resist a request like that, right? Mom, would you take me to see grandpa who's dying? But always remember that it's about teaching children responsibility, to feel loved and to be loving. Now, it would appear that he has the loving part, but what about the responsible part? Robert could easily take the bus to see his grandpa, but it would take 2 hours longer for him. Ironically, if Sally has to drive a whole hour out of her way to pick Robert up and back to pick up the son, effectively what he's saying is, somebody has to be inconvenienced 2 hours, so I want it to be you instead of me. And she also wants him to shoulder the expense of gas and everything else. So in other words, he's saying, if you make this absolutely without expense and effortless for me, then I'll go visit Grandpa. Doesn't look quite so loving now, does it? But we fall for this stuff. And then he said, and the only convenient day for me to go is Thursday, which is a day that Sally works. So this apparently very gracious gesture on his part inconveniences him in no way, not really. It inconveniences his mother. And she's conflicted. Should she take him? Should she take him at all? Well, maybe he should go on the bus. Maybe she should take Thursday off. So what do? You love your son, talking to Sally now, and offer him as much as you choose, as much as you want, as much as you can. So right now you're doing all the work. And your tone in writing to me is that you really don't want to do all the work. Well, then don't. So come up with how much work you're willing to do. That's how simple this is. And then you see if he's willing to do the rest. It's not a compromise. Don't do that. In real love, we don't do compromises. We tell people what we are willing to offer freely. And if the other person isn't willing to do the rest, then clearly they didn't want to do it that much. So, for example, you might say, I'm just giving you options. I'm not telling you what to do. You might say to him, well, if you can get on a bus and get to my house, I'll take you the rest of the way. That's if you want to. And then you tell him, and I can take you on Friday. Or I can take you on some other day of the week when I'm not working. And then he can make arrangements to change his day of work, not you. No matter which one of these options you take, you're still going out of your way to take him down there. The real point of this isn't the details. The real point is love people as much as we're able. And if that's less than they want, that's really not our problem. Here's a member who says, how do you know when you're growing at the right pace? As opposed to taking it easy and not learning enough or being in a rush and trying to do too much all at once. There's not a pace meter that tells you how fast to go. There's not a real love speedometer. So it's mostly just being aware of what you're doing and how you feel. So, for example, some questions that are useful. Are you comfortable and feeling no fear and no pain? If you're completely comfortable and feeling no fear or pain, then almost certainly you're moving too slowly, because growth always involves stretching, which is nearly invariably painful to some extent. You want to kind of be at the edge of your capacities, where you feel stretched a bit, sometimes a lot, but not exceeding your capacities too much, because then you just empty out and you're crippled, which people do themselves all the time. If you're overwhelmed or panicked, then you probably need to slow down. These are just little guidelines. It'd be like you're driving along a road and your eyes are closed and it's pitch black and so you can't see the road. Well, frankly, you can tell pretty well on a long stretch of road whether you're on the road. If you get too far to the left, you hear gravel. You go too far to the right, you hear gravel. Stay between the gravel. So if it's too easy, probably not fast enough. If you're overwhelmed, probably going too fast. It's just kind of a process that requires all your awareness, all your strength, and all your courage and faith. And you'll figure it out, because I really can't tell you. I can give you hints, but that's about all. Here's somebody who says, I'm rereading the parenting book. I had a question about the statement, Whenever you do anything at all to get someone to like you, you're lying. I assume that's a statement I wrote. What about things that are simply reasonable or responsible? So, for example, if I like being naked and I only wear clothes in public so I don't get arrested, if you come into my house and I keep my clothes on so that you'll stay, is that being loving, or am I lying? Am I manipulating you? Again, we're back to motivations, aren't we? So many motivations are possible. So you could be keeping your clothes on when I come over to the house so I don't throw up. I would be grateful for that. You could be doing it so you don't get arrested. That's a different motivation. You could be doing it so that I'm not offended and will like you. You could do it so that you could ingratiate yourself with me and ask a favor of me. You could be doing it because it's just considerate. You don't need me to like you, but you do recognize that most people are not comfortable having a naked adult sitting around. So in that case, perhaps you're being kind, maybe even loving. So many different motivations for a given act. And you're going to have to figure that out. I can't tell you ahead of time what your motivations are. I can very often tell you what your motivations are if I'm watching you do it, from the look on your face and from the words that you use. You continue. Personally, I'm thinking about clothing and showering. I care very little what I look like. I could wear a uniform almost every day of my life and be perfectly happy. But I know that doing so would cause people to think differently of me and judge me, so I don't. Same idea with wearing stained or dirty clothes, showering or shaving. It seems unavoidable that people do judge us on our appearance, so I do what I consider a minimum, but the truth is I'd like to do even less. It often feels unloving to do even what I do. It helps reduce the discomfort that others might experience around me and helps me get some of what I want. People are more likely to seek me as a wise man if I don't look and smell like a homeless person, for example. Again, honey, you're going to have to judge this. There are many motivations for a single action, and they might be mixed. So as long as you're honest about them, what's the problem? So you shower before somebody comes over who might want you to be their coach, for example. Well, that could be considerate. Say 20% of it could be considerate. And yet you also recognize that there's no way in this world they're going to hire you as a coach if you look and smell like a homeless person. So 40% of it is selfish. 20% of it is so that you're not arrested. You're going to have to figure out what the combination is. And then over time, and with experience, and if you're rigorously honest, you gradually increase the selfless part of your motivation. That's all. You don't have to suddenly become selfless, just aware. You continue. Another statement that I read was, we're lying when we try to think of the right things to say in a conversation so that someone will have a favorable impression of us. I know that when I send you, referring to me, emails, I spend more time writing them than I do with most people. I know you're busy. I try to be concise and clear so that I'm understood and don't waste your time. I want you to continue to spend time with me, and if my communications were very lengthy and unintelligible, I'd be less likely to get the clear responses that I want. Does that mean that I'm lying to revise my emails to you? Not necessarily. Again, multiple motivations, and frankly, you just told me the truth about why you spend more time with your emails with me, which actually makes sense to me. If I want somebody to read my emails, I try to make them concise too. Those of you who have read my emails know that I keep my words to a pretty much absolute minimum. Why? Because the more words you use, the less people listen. Why would I bother to write unless I wanted it to be effectively heard? So why ruin my message by being unclear, vague, intermittently bursting into a foreign language, slobbering on the paper, putting in half sentences? So in a given message, I could be doing part of it for me, part of it for you, I'm the one that's going to have to figure that out. So you might be clear in communication for you, so you get a clearer answer. You might work at being clear so I'd like you. You might be clear for me so I wouldn't have to work as hard. Just observe. Observe and be ever looking for evidence of increasing selflessness. You're the only one who can judge that. Although, if you have difficulty judging whether you're being selfish, have discussions like you just did, describing why you do things, and people will help you see your selfishness, which just makes it more obvious when you're being selfless. Here's a member that says, I heard secondhand that you suggested that when people are talking about an interaction, they should use the name of the person they interacted with. That not to do so would be lying and protecting ourselves from being vulnerable. Is that true? I don't remember saying it exactly like that, but I do remember saying something like that. So why would I have? We tend to tell stories in generalities. We say, when people act like victims, I hate it. Well, how do you respond to a generality? What do you do? Go, uh-huh. It's when people speak to me in generalities, I often, if you've spoken with me more than once, you've heard me say, example. Because I can teach you with an example. If you give me a generality, I don't know why they acted like a victim. I don't know who they are, because different people have different capacities to hear your response to them, depending. With some people, you could actually point out their victimhood. Some people you couldn't. So, got to have more specifics. Or I get questions that go like this. So, what do I do when someone attacks me? Well, that's just so vague. Because it might be, for example, that that person wasn't attacking you. I'd need to hear specifics. And that you simply took it as an attack. Versus, what do I do when somebody comes at me with a loaded 45? That would be a different response. So, clear. When Susie said X, quote her. And the only reason to use her name is to provide context, not to attack Susie. So if you're telling the story is going to be an attack of Susie, you might formulate your telling of the thing until you're not. Well, of course, if you tell me the story, I'm not going to take it as an attack anyway. I'll somehow dissect out what part was attacking and wasn't. But be specific. When Susie said this, I felt this. That's way more clear, especially if I know Susie. Because very often I can say, oh, well, there's just no way in this world that Susie was attacking you. And people will say, well, how do you know you weren't there? Because I know Susie. That'd be like you telling me, I saw this pig on the side of the road and he burst into Nessun Dorma, which is an aria that Pavarotti is particularly famous for. Very unlikely that a pig did that, because pigs don't sing. Very unlikely that Susie attacked you, so using names can be very helpful. It's clearer to use names. It's also more vulnerable for you, because if I know Susie, I will almost certainly form some judgment about whether she did or did not, which may scare you. But again, only use it for context, not to attack. Here's a member who says, I'm finding a challenge that's always been a challenge, trusting that money will flow. I'm choosing to believe the evidence I have seen of a lack of everything when I was a child, and money was always easy to blame. So this has been a tough one for me to let go of, allowing money to flow easily. I've been working on detaching my worth from the income I create. Money's always been hard to acquire, though, and I have gone out and created everything in my life, including the mistakes, finding the line of trusting and action hard to define and to know how to behave in this new place. It's easy to tell that this is confusing for you because the question is confusing. So, not saying you should have said the question more clearly. It's just obvious from the phrasing of it, you don't know where you're going with this concept or this puzzle. People are really afraid around money. Why? Well, for one thing, starving ain't so great. And so people do kind of like to have enough to survive. But that's not the main thing. With the exception of, people who live in Darfur and people who live in countries where it really is marginal whether they'll live, most people have enough to survive. Most people have a thing about money because we use it as a measurable gauge of how we're doing in our lives and what we're worth. If we don't have much, that confirms the opinion we already have that we're worthless. And that's unbearable. So if we already feel like we're worthless and we have no money, we have measurable proof that we're not worthwhile. So what do? We come up with solutions to not having enough money. There are lots of them, but I'm going to discuss just a couple. One is we work harder to get more. That never works. It seems to be really obvious. I don't have enough money, so I'll work harder, get more money. But as soon as people get more money, what do? They don't feel more secure. They don't feel more worthwhile because it doesn't have the effect they thought it would. And so they work harder to get even more money. A man sat across from me, not 6 inches from my rocking chair, who was worth $1.5 billion with a B, and said, I'm the loneliest man on earth. So he'd been told all of his life if he had enough money, he'd be happy. And he was, let's just say, very disappointed. So getting more doesn't do it. And then some people go kind of the other way. Instead of working harder, they do the law of attraction game. So they say, well, we just need to envision the flow of the money, and it will just magically appear. And when people talk about the law of attraction, although there is such a thing, almost invariably they talk about money. So those who have less money just aren't in the flow, which of course means that the rich are in the flow, and if you don't have a lot of money, then you're crap. And that isn't true either. Because if that were true, then the people who lied, cheated, and stole in Enron were in the universal flow. They were just following the law of attraction. No, they were just lying, cheating, and stealing. Hitler was just in the flow. At one point, he had a virtual corner on the world's market of gold. Bernie Madoff and his Ponzi scheme, he was just in the flow. So neither way is true. So what's the solution? Be you, honey. It always comes back to the truth and love. Be yourself. Identify what you want to be and what you want to do. They're not always the same. What we do comes out of who we are, but then learn to do it well. Keep in mind, as you're making these decisions, what would actually enable you to make a living. And then you combine all that, who you are, what you want to do, what would reasonably make a living, and see what happens. Examples. It's really common for little kids who are good artists to be told, oh, you're such a good artist, you should grow up and become an artist. Well, drawing really well with crayons doesn't equate to making a living. And so New York and Southern California is filled with people who were great artists when they were kids, or who aspired to be actors and who can never, ever make a living doing it. And their dreams are very sincere. Well, maybe they just didn't visualize it enough. No, I've met some of these people. Follow your dreams and be realistic. I have a son who's a professional singer and dancer, and he once asked me, Dad, what do you think about my becoming a professional dancer? And I said, well, it's a really difficult field to make a living in. For every person who makes a lifetime income as a dancer or singer, he's learned this in subsequent years. There are more than 20 who don't, but who start off on that career path. I I said, so as long as you're aware of the difficulties, then do what you feel. He did, and did become a professional dancer and then singer, and modified his dreams according to his abilities and financial realities, and now travels all around the world and makes an honest-to-goodness full-time living, and has for the last 10 years and probably will till he retires doing that. I played the piano very well when I was a kid. I've played the piano in front of 1,000 people. I could be dazzling on occasion. And people would say, oh, you must do this for the rest of your life. Well, it was fun. I enjoyed the expression. I was pretty good, but I was also realistic. I heard the people who made their living playing the piano. I wasn't nearly that good. So I made a decision many years ago. I would never make a living playing the piano. I could make a living doing something else, which I could still enjoy, and then enjoy playing the piano too. So you have to infuse some practicality in that. One of our sons, Mike, really enjoyed history, really enjoyed reading history, and was going to go into history until he realized that the possibility of his making an abundant living as a history teacher, or in fact even getting a job as a history teacher at the college level, was awful. So he changed his career into something that turns out to be far more profitable, and he reads history for fun on the side. So be aware of your ideal, infuse it with a little realism, and then live with the results instead of complaining about it. Something that we all have to figure out and struggle with our entire lives. I established an entire career and then changed my career halfway through my life. So there is no one right answer. Here's somebody who says, when your spouse is at a point in her life where she does not want to participate in working on the marriage, what do? You got a choice. You can live in a completely loveless marriage and accept things as they are, with you miserable and her miserable. Or, second, you could learn how to be far more loving yourself consistently and see what happens. For one thing, you'll be happier. Your children will be happier if you have children. And many marriages have completely changed as a result of one person making the decision to be loving. Or you could decide that you're not willing or able to participate in a marriage where you would be doing all the learning and giving of love and just leave. In some cases, a spouse, particularly people who have mental illnesses that are just overwhelming, the burden of trying to be the only person loving and learning can be just crushing. If you find it crushing, then it might be time to leave. But these are only questions you can answer. I'm just kind of giving you ideas of what some of the options are. Here's a member who says, Thursday and Friday I had allergies and a sore throat. Today my boss comes in and asks if I felt better. I said, oh yeah, I got lots of sleep this weekend. And he asked if I slept with anyone. I didn't realize we had 2 sexual harassment questions in one video chat, since we haven't had one in like forever. That's quite a stretch to go from, yeah, I slept a lot this weekend, to have you slept with somebody? I was taken aback by this. I didn't know what to say, and I was so surprised that I answered him and said, no. I felt confused and threatened. How could I handle this differently next time? Well, in case you were wondering, he was completely inappropriate. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you say when you're, 14. Somebody who's that crazily inappropriate isn't being scary. They're ridiculously sophomoric. So don't waste time being offended. This is about his emptiness, and you, because you were afraid and inexperienced, you actually answered his stupid question. So next time, this time's done. Leave it alone. Don't go and confront him about it. He'll deny it. He'll say he didn't mean it. It's not even worth doing. You are both inexperienced and foolish. Be calm and loving, always, when somebody comes at you. Suppose he says, did you sleep with anyone this weekend? It's so disarming to laugh. You laugh. You say, oh, I don't ever, under any circumstances, answer a private question like that. Ever. Done. You're finished. No attacking, no defending. You're not setting a boundary. You're simply stating what you are or are not willing to do. Nobody's threatened. The number of times that somebody will keep pounding you past that are just minuscule. I think we have, yeah, we do. We got time for one more. If we run out of time, well, whatever. Here's a lady who called me, actually. Her mother was in the hospital, not doing well, in a country where the medical care isn't especially great, and so she needed to be moved out of the country. And her brother, big brother, steps in, and he's all macho and tough. And he says, no, she needs to stay home. And she wanted to know what she could do. It's really not complicated. It went on and on. The family said this, and these people disagreed with her. She was just all tore up because of all the conflicting expectations and demands. You make one decision at a time. And almost every decision is a yes or no, door A or door B, choice 1 or choice 2. But you have to make them one at a time and in the right order. Now, some guidelines. Don't control people. You don't have to. You state what you will do, what you offer. So, first, you could say, this is just an illustration of how this decision could be approached. I'm not telling anybody what decision to make any more than her brother. You could say, I will help her move to another country where her care will be better, or I won't help her move, and I'm not going to participate and sit by her bedside as I've been doing night after night and participate in killing her, which is what's happening. So that's the first decision. And that's the decision that she offers to her mother, because her mother is still legally in charge of her care. If her mother chooses to move and the brother gets in the way, we're still down to A or B. So you say to the brother, I will help her move and take care of all the medical decisions, or you can take over all the medical decisions. But I won't share it with you because I refuse to participate in conflict. One decision at a time, A or B, always offer what you're willing to do without controlling anybody else. I get asked every day for more time or energy or whatever than I have. I do. Every day somebody asks me to do something I choose not to do. I offer what I have freely, but you get A or B. And if somebody says to me, well, but what I want is C. Fascinating. But I am offering you A or B. And if we do that without telling other people what to do, we feel constantly unconditionally giving. We will still have people unhappy with us, but we won't be controlling and we'll feel loving. And as always, it's always about the loving. We'll see you in a week.